No god had ever requested judgment. They had been accused, cursed, abandoned, forgotten, rewritten into symbols and metaphors, but never judged by consent. Judgment required equality, and equality was the one condition divinity had always avoided. Gods ruled, corrected, punished, withdrew, but they did not submit. The idea itself violated the architecture of myth, which is why the request unsettled the world long before it was understood. Her name was Lyssara. In the oldest records, she appeared inconsistently, sometimes described as a goddess of balance, sometimes of mercy, sometimes of consequence disguised as compassion. The contradictions were not errors. They were symptoms. Lyssara governed the space where intention and outcome failed to align cleanly, where good acts caused harm and cruel acts preserved life. She did not resolve those contradictions. She held them. And now, after millennia of silence, she returned. Not with thunder, not with plague or blessing, but with a single declaration delivered into the human world without ceremony, without miracle, without enforcement. She wished to be judged. The statement spread unevenly, fragmenting as it moved through interpretation, dismissed as art in one place, provocation in another, mythology revived for modern consumption. But beneath the noise, something deeper responded. Institutions felt pressure without knowing why. Moral debates hardened. Old arguments resurfaced with new urgency, as if an unseen question had been placed at the center of human conscience and refused to move. By the time the request was taken seriously, Lyssara had already prepared the conditions. She did not appear before priests. She did not address believers. She stood before a tribunal composed entirely of humans who did not agree with one another. Judges, philosophers, historians, survivors, skeptics, architects of systems and victims crushed beneath them, none selected for purity or wisdom, only for incompatibility. Lyssara demanded no reverence. She forbade ritual. She required language precise enough to accuse. Her presence was undeniable, not because of spectacle, but because reality tightened around her. Lies struggled to form. Simplifications collapsed mid-sentence. Anyone who spoke in her proximity found their own reasoning exposed, not to her, but to themselves. She listened. That was the first shock. Gods were not known for listening, especially not to accusations that carried no expectation of forgiveness. Lyssara offered no defense. She asked questions instead, not rhetorical, not guiding, but surgical, forcing humans to articulate what they believed a god was responsible for. Wars waged in her name. Mercy that arrived too late. Justice applied unevenly and called fate. Every contradiction humans had blamed on divinity was laid bare. Lyssara neither denied nor accepted the charges. She allowed them to accumulate. When asked why she had come now after belief had thinned and gods no longer ruled openly, her answer was simple. Because judgment is only meaningful when it costs something. The tribunal understood then what she was offering. Not performance. Not reconciliation. Accountability. If found guilty, Lyssara would relinquish divinity permanently, not retreat, not fade, but end, her influence sealed, her function removed from the structure of reality. No god had ever risked that. To be judged was to accept the possibility of being unnecessary. The implications were staggering. To condemn her was to claim humanity no longer required divine contradiction, no longer needed a god to absorb moral complexity. To acquit her was to admit dependence, an admission humans had spent centuries avoiding. Lyssara waited. Not anxiously. Not defiantly. With the stillness of something prepared to disappear if judged correctly. And for the first time in history, humanity realized the weight of the question was not whether a god had failed them. It was whether they were ready to live without one. The tribunal did not deliberate immediately. That, too, was unprecedented. Human courts thrived on procedure, on containment, on the illusion that complexity could be scheduled. But Lyssara's presence dismantled rhythm itself. Sessions extended without conclusion. Questions looped back on themselves. Arguments that once felt decisive collapsed when followed to their moral endpoints. The tribunal discovered that judging a god was not about weighing evidence, but about defining standards they had never been forced to articulate fully. Lyssara remained present throughout. She did not sit above them. She did not stand apart. She occupied the space like an unresolved equation, beautiful and composed, her mythological presence undeniable yet restrained, her gaze steady without dominance. Time behaved differently around her, not slower, but heavier, each moment carrying consequence the way myths once had. The accusations deepened. They moved beyond wars and disasters, beyond the obvious scars of history, into subtler territory. Lyssara was accused of ambiguity itself, of allowing moral grayness to exist where certainty might have prevented suffering. Humans demanded to know why gods had not simplified the world, why right and wrong had been left entangled, why mercy so often arrived unevenly. "Why did you not intervene more clearly?" one of the judges asked, voice controlled but brittle. Lyssara answered without defensiveness. "Because clarity imposed from above becomes obedience, not ethics." That answer unsettled the room. If gods had enforced morality cleanly, humans would have followed rules, not developed responsibility. Suffering would have been reduced, yes, but authorship would have been lost. Lyssara admitted openly that she had allowed humans to make catastrophic choices rather than remove the burden of choice itself. This was not a justification. It was an admission. The tribunal pressed harder. They accused her of selective silence, of appearing present in myth while absent in reality, of allowing people to suffer while stories about gods persisted comfortably above them. They demanded to know whether her beauty, her symbolism, her continued existence had served as a distraction from accountability rather than a guide toward it. Lyssara did not deflect. For the first time, she named her own failure. "I stayed," she said, "because contradiction required a witness. But I underestimated how easily presence becomes excuse." That sentence fractured something fundamental. The tribunal realized then that Lyssara was not defending divinity. She was evaluating it alongside them. The judgment was not one-sided. It was mutual. As days passed, something unexpected occurred outside the chamber. People stopped waiting for the outcome. Not because they lost interest, but because the process itself had begun to alter behavior. Public discourse shifted subtly. Moral debates grew sharper, less abstract. Appeals to fate, destiny, or divine mystery lost their persuasive power. Without a verdict yet delivered, humanity had begun acting as though one might not arrive. Lyssara observed this with quiet intensity. She had not intended this effect. Judgment was supposed to conclude her relevance, not accelerate its erosion. The world was rehearsing life without her before the sentence was spoken. The tribunal sensed it too. If they condemned her, they would merely formalize what was already occurring. If they absolved her, they would restore a god to a world that had begun moving on. One question remained unasked, the one Lyssara had been waiting for. Finally, a historian spoke. "What happens," he asked, "to the contradictions you governed if you are gone?" The room stilled. Lyssara closed her eyes briefly, not in fear, but in acknowledgement. "They do not disappear," she said. "They become yours. Fully." She explained then what had never been written into myth. Her role had not been to solve moral contradiction, but to contain it, to prevent it from overwhelming human systems before they were capable of absorbing it themselves. If she ended, contradictions would not vanish. They would redistribute, unevenly, brutally, without divine buffering. Judging her guilty would not simplify the world. It would make it honest. The tribunal understood the cost now. To condemn Lyssara was to accept permanent moral adulthood, without appeal, without metaphysical delay. To spare her was to admit that humanity still required a god to hold what it could not. Lyssara looked at them, not pleading, not commanding, waiting. And for the first time since the request had been made, the tribunal realized the verdict was no longer about a god. It was about whether humanity trusted itself enough to inherit contradiction without supervision. The verdict was delivered without ceremony. No gavel struck. No declaration echoed through the chamber. The tribunal did not rise. They did not dramatize the moment. because they had come to understand that judgment, when honest, did not require performance. It required ownership. They found Lyssara guilty, not of cruelty, not of neglect, but of remaining necessary longer than she should have. The judgment was precise, almost gentle in its language. Lyssara was condemned not because she had failed humanity, but because humanity had reached a point where her continued existence delayed something essential. Moral contradiction, once held safely within divinity, now needed to be carried by humans fully, without deflection, without metaphysical shelter. Lyssara accepted the sentence immediately. There was no resistance, no sorrow, no final argument. Her expression remained calm, luminous even, not because she was untouched by the outcome, but because she had anticipated it. Judgment, after all, had been her request. She stepped forward willingly into the narrowing of existence that followed. Divinity did not leave her violently. It folded. Her presence diminished not in size or beauty, but in scope. The space around her loosened. Reality relaxed its attention. The weight that had pressed against thought and language lifted slowly, carefully, like scaffolding removed from a completed structure. Lyssara became finite in the most profound sense, her awareness compressing into sequence, her immortality dissolving into a single forward-moving life. She did not disappear. She ended. Outside the tribunal, the world shifted without spectacle. Nothing broke. Nothing healed instantly. But something irreversible occurred. Appeals to divine ambiguity failed to land. Moral evasion felt thinner, less convincing. Contradiction no longer had a container beyond human systems, and so it began to surface everywhere, in policy, in culture, in personal decisions that could no longer be softened by fate or cosmic mystery. The gods did not respond. There were none left who could. In the absence of Lyssara, contradictions did not become clearer. They became heavier. Responsibility spread unevenly, painfully, forcing humans to negotiate ethics without appeal. Some failed spectacularly. Others adapted slowly. Civilization did not improve in any simple sense. It matured under pressure. Centuries later, scholars would argue about the moment moral adulthood began, pointing to shifts in law, in language, in how people spoke about blame and choice. They would search for causes, never suspecting that the answer had once stood before humanity and asked to be judged. Lyssara was not remembered as a goddess. She survived briefly as a philosophical footnote, then as metaphor, then not at all. Her beauty, her authority, her silence vanished completely from story and song. That, too, was part of the sentence. Because a god who accepts judgment does not become legend. She becomes obsolete. And in that obsolescence, humanity inherited something far more demanding than worship. It inherited contradiction without refuge, and learned, slowly and imperfectly, how to live with it.